change the spotlight if that's all right.
That's perfect. Yeah, I can do that.
Would you like us to go ahead and interpret if Mr. Pullen has not joined us
Thank
yet?
you, Matt. All right. So, as far as fairness goes, since everyone, for the people that did show up on time, why don't we'll start right now, and then the others can join us. The agenda is up on the screen. We'll go through the welcome, the sounding board topic schedule, feedback from last month, and this month's topic is transit and active transportation. Then we'll get feedback from the committee on transit and active transportation, and then we'll go over next month's sounding board schedule. Do we want to say hello to each other since it's been a month since we've been here? So I'm Gary Albrecht, the project manager.
I'm Matt Herman. I'm a transportation planner with Clark County Public Works. Michael, do you want to go?
Sure. I'm Mike Salas with Public Works as a transportation planner as well.
And Walt is on the phone.
Yes, Walt Gordon. I represent the Clark County Developmental Disabilities Advisory Board and former manager of the ADA Transportation for C-Tran.
Excellent. Daniel Weaver.
Daniel Weaver, the chair of the Railroad Advisory Board and the Board of Equalization for Clark County.
Excellent. Franklin Johnson.
Yes, I'm Franklin Johnson. I'm representing the Clark County Commission on Aging and sitting in for Dr. Tanya Stewart.
Excellent. Linda David.
Afternoon, Linda David with Southwest Washington Regional Transportation Council.
Thank you. And Taylor Eade from C-Tran.
Hello, Taylor Eit, Senior Planner with C-Tran.
Looks like we have others joining us. We also have Allison and Liz, our interpreters today.
Hey, Gary, Matt, Jamie's here.
Oh, excellent. We're just doing introductions. So Jamie Housley. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks everyone then for attending. All right, so that's the agenda. I'm going to put up the PowerPoint presentation. It's the agenda, and I got to take a pause for a second. So my electronics, everything is working correctly today, so I'm super excited. I hope I haven't jinxed myself. I'm gonna knock on wood. So I'm a little thrilled for myself. All right, here is the sounding board schedule. Oh no, there it is. So we are about halfway through. So we're at October 19th. We'll get feedback consensus on the pedestrians and bikes, and then going forward with the transit and active transportation. And here are last month's questions, 4 questions that we covered. Number 1, does the bicycle pedestrian master plan reflect our current needs? Number 2, to what extent should the county retrofit existing neighborhoods to add sidewalks? Number 3, should private roads in the urban area be required to construct a sidewalk on both sides of the road? And number 4, should we plan our biking infrastructure based on the types of riders, interested but concerned, somewhat confident, and highly confident? So here's the feedback. We focused on pedestrian safety, sidewalk infrastructure, and bicycle transportation.
So Gary Michael has his hand raised.
Michael.
From our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting last month, we had one additional bit of feedback related to question number 4. that was from a bicyclist on the committee that considers himself highly confident. And he stated that on a multi-use path, he would much prefer to not use them if there was an available bike lane. His concerns were safety for himself and safety for pedestrians and other folks using the multi-use pathway. He had a lot of concerns about the unknown actions of both pedestrians, people walking with dogs, those sorts of things. He felt for people that were, highly confident, it was much safer for them to be on a roadway and a bike lane.
Thank you, Michael.
Excellent. I'll add that to our notes too.
And then, so in this slide, we heard automated bicycle count stations could capture bicycle data to demonstrate the bicycle demand. Bike lane widths need to be wide enough to accommodate three-wheeled bicycles. Off-street paths are preferred, and bicycle pedestrian travel should be evaluated equally with transportation projects.
So I think with that, if you can go back, based on the feedback that Michael just gave, we can revise that off-street paths are preferred for the non-highly confident bike users, so that it's consistent with the language that Michael just provided us.
Yeah, that makes sense. These are the questions that we'll ask for this month. So please think about them as we go through the presentation. So at the end of the slide deck, we'll go over these same questions again. So the three questions that we have are: one, should neighborhood parks provide parking? Number two, in addition to pedestrians and bicycles, should Clark County expand transportation planning efforts to include new active transportation technologies like e-bikes, e-skateboards, and e-scooters? And then number three, should emerging micro-mobility modes have specific goals and policies along with bicycles and pedestrians? We've got Clark County owns and operates approximately 4,006 acres of open space and parks lands. So these lands are divided into three categories: neighborhood parks, community, and regional parks. The National Recreation and Parks Association suggests that a park system at a minimum be composed of a core system of 6.25 to 10.5 acres per 1,000 persons of urban parkland. I do want to point out that the Growth Management Act does not require a minimum a number of people per park ratios. That's just a number that we use for planning. So this slide shows 45 neighborhood parks in unincorporated Clark County. So here's a pop quiz. Can someone tell me where the unincorporated Clark County is? Anyone?
It's outside any city boundaries, right?
Yes. David.
David, if you're speaking, we can hear you.
Yeah, I saw the interpreter tell me that my voice, you couldn't hear me. Thank you, interpreter. What I was saying is where I live in Hazeldale, where it splits from Main Street to go to the highway, to go to Highway 99 and Hazeldale Avenue, that little Y there, that's kind of where the boundary is, where you go into an unincorporated area.
Yep. Yeah, for Vancouver's unincorporated area, that's correct. So that's good. Glad we know where that is. All right. So just a quick little background about neighborhood parks. They provide basic access to recreation opportunities for nearby residents, enhance neighborhood identity, and preserve neighborhood open space. The parks are designed for non-organized recreation. They're located within walking and bicycling distance of most users. The parks are generally 3 to 5 acres in size and primarily serve residents within a half-mile radius. The community parks provide a focal point of gathering for broad groups of users. They're usually 10 to 100 acres in size. Community parks are used by all segments of the population and generally serve residents from 1 to 3 mile service area. Community parks include recreational facilities such as sport parks, skate parks, and play courts. Here's it. This slide shows a map showing the parks and sidewalk locations in unincorporated and rural Clark County. As you can see, there are a lot of, the blue lines are the sidewalks and the green blobs are the parks. But I didn't want to focus too much on a specific area, just kind of a general overview of where the parks and sidewalks are.
Not to speak over Gary, and I apologize if I'm doing so, but I also want to note that because this month's topic is active transportation, we wanted to show our sidewalk infrastructure in relation to those active environments, those parks, and where people are able to seek health resources for our parks. Daniel Weaver has his hand up.
Yeah, I don't remember if we discussed this last time or whether it's even appropriate at this time, but what is the rules now on parking at local parks? Is there a charge? Where is there a charge, and why is there a charge, and what are the rules right now?
Well, we'll get into that, but Matt, did you want to ask or answer any of those right now?
Sure. So the neighborhood parks currently are not required to have parking built with them. So the neighborhood parks that you see, otherwise known as pocket parks, do not have parking associated with them. The regional parks, the big parks that are in large area, do have parking, and there is a fee that's associated with the parking. I'm not with Parks Department, so I apologize if I'm speaking to them or talking inaccurately, but my understanding was that the fees help reduce camping at the parks and also help with the maintenance of those regional parks.
So this slide shows the park access by park type, average distance to the nearest sidewalk, maximum distance to the nearest sidewalk, and the furthest park from a sidewalk. So at the urban neighborhood park, the average distance to the nearest sidewalk is 136 feet. And the maximum distance to the nearest sidewalk for urban neighborhood parks are almost 5,000 feet. And the furthest park from a sidewalk for a neighborhood park is the Fairgrounds Park. And then for urban community parks, the average distance to the nearest sidewalk is 310 feet. And the maximum distance to a nearest sidewalk is close to 2,600 feet. And Fairgrounds is the furthest park from a sidewalk. And then for urban regional parks, the average distance to the nearest sidewalk jumps up to 2,319 feet, and the maximum distance is 4,637 feet. And the furthest park from a sidewalk is Vancouver Lake Park.
So go ahead.
Go ahead.
Gary. So with this map, obviously you're seeing that the North Fairgrounds Park and the Fairgrounds Park are jumping out as those that are least accessible by sidewalk. These parks are in growing neighborhoods. The Fairgrounds neighborhood, that area was recently open for urban level development. So as that neighborhood develops further and sidewalks are added, we'll be able to both minimize the maximum distance as well as the average distance.
We'll move on to the next slide. Active transportation is not new to Clark County. But active transportation modes are essential components of their overall transportation system, meeting a variety of societal, environmental, and economic goals. They include environmental stewardship, congestion alleviation, health improvements by walking and biking, safety, efficient travel, cost savings and social equity, and attractive urban forms. So this slide looks at the transportation policies that include active transportation. Clark County's Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan, Goal 6, addresses active transportation. With an active transportation lens, we can compare other transportation plans and evaluate whether active transportation components occur in these plans. This table identifies transportation plans and evaluates them with an active transportation lens, looking at connectivity, safety, opportunity, participation, and partnership. Washington State's active transportation plan serves as the guiding document to implement active transportation plans at the local level. RTC is in the process of creating an active transportation plan. Clark County Public Works is planning on creating an active transportation plan in the near future.
Hey, Gary, I'm going to pause you and switch interpreters.
Okay.
Okay.
When we look at active transportation plan in our comprehensive plan, development code, and supporting documents, like the Highway 99 SubArea Plan, we talk about activity centers, but we do not define them in the development code. We have them identified in the Highway 99 SubArea Plan. The activity centers in Highway 99 have access to C-Trans stops, sidewalks, and bike lanes on collector and classified streets in activity centers. In the map, the bike lanes are in blue, and the sidewalks are in gray. And the pink areas are the activity centers, and I'll talk about them more in the next slide. So the Highway 99 SubArea Plan indicates activity centers have pedestrian access to transit within a quarter mile of existing and planned frequent transit stops and access to and through major activity centers. The SubArea Plan identifies 6 activity centers that were analyzed for the percent of missing sidewalks, population, households, jobs, home ownership, lease of vehicles, and diversity. A 2014 county resolution relating to the comprehensive plan and growth management calls for a planning target of a job to household ratio of 1 to 1, and that's for the 2015 to 2035 comprehensive planning period. The frequency of bus service is a contributing factor to people accessing transit within major activity centers. We know that additional pedestrian count information is needed to help understand the demand for walking to transit. As I've already stated, the activity centers were analyzed for the households, jobs, household ownership, lease of vehicles, and percent of missing sidewalks. So the activity centers are on the left-hand side of the table. We've got 99 Commons, the Klein Line Commons, Minnehaha Gateway Village, Tenny Creek Commons, and Totem Town Center. So I'm going to go back in the PowerPoint and show you where these are at. So can everyone see these? Okay, so on the right-hand side of this slide is the SubArea Plan. So Klein Line Commons is on the top. Tenny Creek is down below that. 99 Commons is in the middle. And then the Totem Town Center is below that. And then the Minnehaha Gateway is on the very bottom. And the Parks Commons is on the farthest right-hand side of the boundary of the Highway 99 SubArea Plan. So the percent of households that own and lease any vehicle can indicate the area's needs to use public transit. The majority of activity centers have about 50% of missing sidewalks. The diversity index is around 40%. And that was taken out of this slide. So I can get into that later on, but I'd rather not. So it gets kind of complicated, so I apologize for bringing that up. Let's see here. About 40% own and lease a car. So we've already know that additional pedestrian count information is needed to understand the demand for walking. So the frequency of service contributes to people accessing transit within a quarter mile of transit in these stops. The jobs to household ratio is well below the planning goal of 1 job per household. We get into public transit on this slide. So the Community Framework Plan was adopted in 1994, and it envisions a shift in emphasis of transportation systems from private vehicles to public transit, including high-capacity transit and non-polluting alternatives such as walking and biking. The data indicates more work is needed to make this shift a reality for Clark County. The American Community Survey data from 2014 to 2018 shows 2% of the mode share use transit as a mode to work. We all use various ways to get to and from the places we need to be, including work, school, shopping, social engagements, and accessing services. For those who are dependent on public transportation, barriers like infrequent or limited bus routes, unsafe streets, and high fare costs can impact a person's ability to access their daily needs. Transportation can also be a vehicle for wellness. Walkable communities that are safe for pedestrians and cyclists increase opportunities for physical activity. A robust transportation system includes can reduce pollution and fatalities due to car collisions, promoting a transportation system that allows all users equal opportunity in mobility, independent of age, ability, income, or race, is critical to the health of a community. So as of November 2018, C-Tran maintains approximately 991 bus stops throughout the fixed route system within Clark County. Various amenities spread through the routes to include 192 passenger shelters and 79, they're called semi seats. There's a little private seat that attaches to the side of the transit shelter. C-Tran provides bike lockers, bike banks, and bike parking facilities at major town centers, park and ride facilities, and at the agency's administrative office. Additionally, each bus in the fixed fleet route is equipped with a bike rack capable of accommodating 2 bikes. So this table shows the location of bike facilities on the C-Tran network. This slide evaluates transit and households that do not own or have access to a vehicle. This map, and there are 2 other additional maps that were created by looking at 3 quartile breaks. So it's looking at the data in 3 groups, but basically breaking it down into equal census tracts of the lowest third, the middle third, and the highest third. So, and the blue is the highest third. That's the dark blue is the highest third, and then the light blue is the lowest third. And so if you look at the map on the top right, that's the town of Yakult is up there, and it's a very large census tract up there. So the town numbers are low, but it actually skews the ratio a little bit. So that's why that area shows up as more transit dependent and less auto ownership than the surrounding areas. A lot of that land is DNR land, so it kind of makes sense. So this map breaks down county households without a vehicle by renter and owner-occupied households. As you can see, the map on the left, so if we're looking at just the dark blue areas, so that compared to the households, housing costs for renters and high cost of owning a vehicle create an increased likelihood of the need of rental households to travel by transit. That's what I wanted to highlight on the left, is there are more darker blue areas, which would indicate that there's a higher need for transit for renters, and then for the owners on the right, the darker blue indicates a need for transit as well. And then Matt, did you want to talk about these slides, the next 23 to 26?
Sure. So I apologize for those commissions or committee members that have seen these slides, but it's worth noting when we talk about transit planning. So typically, transit agencies measure their catchment area by a quarter mile. And that's as the crow flies. So here we're going to go through a bit of analysis that was done to see what's truly within that quarter-mile walking distance. We took two distinct neighborhoods for comparison reasons. On the left is a historic neighborhood near the core of Vancouver. And then on the right is a suburban neighborhood. The suburban neighborhood is along 99th Street, just west of Geyser Middle School, so east of Highway 99. And the light blue here shows that quarter mile as the crow flies distance to existing bus stops. I will say that the historic neighborhood, though that bus route that's showing with the bus stops is no longer in service, but was done at the time of this analysis. You move on to the next slide. So as you know, that catchment area is measured as the crow flies, but we don't fly. So what is truly within a quarter-mile walking distance? That's what the pink shading is showing. So while it might be a quarter mile from the bus stop, a quarter-mile walking distance is truly different than the quarter mile as the crow flies distance. So from the historic neighborhood, you can see that it covers a large percentage of that blue catchment area that's within a quarter-mile walking distance. However, on the suburban neighborhood that you're seeing on the right, it's a much smaller distance. The grid pattern isn't largely in effect with the street networks as in the historic neighborhood. So that quarter mile doesn't cover as much land as in the historic neighborhood. And moving on to the next one. So luckily with that, the development of the suburban neighborhood, there was some forethought put into the development of that. On the left, you're seeing that neighborhood zoomed in, and near that bus stop, you're seeing a black bolded line. That black bolded line is a pedestrian access way. By allowing that pedestrian access way to connect to that bus stop, it significantly increases that walkable catchment area that you're seeing on the right in the hatched pink. So without the pedestrian access way, when we overlay that pink hatching with the solid pink, you can see the area that has been accessible by installing that pedestrian access way. Next slide. So transit agencies plan when there's population. A transit agency goes in after population has resided in the neighborhood, and it is purely dependent on serving that population. Conversely, if the population can't get to the transit stops or the bus stops, then the transit agency is unable to attract bus riders. So in the past, there have been developments that have been put in where we have bus stops, but the bus stops don't have the pedestrian catchment area that they aim to serve. So for instance, if this map is showing 99th Street east of SR 503 or 117th Avenue at the corner of Northwest 32nd Avenue. You're seeing a bus stop right on the corner on the eastbound lane. There are homes in this development that can see the bus stop from their backyard, but they have to travel further than a quarter mile to reach that same bus stop because they have to go all the way around their subdivision.
Matt,
So,
can I try to zoom in on the area?
sure.
Oh, sorry.
Right, exactly. So because there aren't pedestrian access ways to reach those bus stops, pedestrians have to travel out of distance in order to get to that. Really have to make a significant amount of effort to reach that bus stop. We've noted this error in our codes and our policies. Most recently, the Clark County Council in December of 2020 passed an ordinance that required pedestrian access ways when they are adjacent or abut collectors and arterial roadways, when they're not served by the street network. So we're trying to retrofit our codes and our policies so that we can make transit more attractable to our residents, but we're also seeing the deficiency as well. Are there any questions regarding that? I know that's a lot to absorb. Okay.
Will we switch interpreters?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This slide demonstrates past transit planning. Recent capital projects work with C-Tran to locate and install bus shelters on Highway 99 at the Fred Meyer near 78th Street and near Northeast 99th Street. So we've got pictures of the shelters on the top, in the bottom left of the slide. C-Tran has a park and ride in Salmon Creek at Northeast 10th Avenue and Northeast 139th Street. And that's the picture on the right of the slide. The county is in the process of completing Northeast 10th Avenue to have bike lanes and sidewalks between Northeast 149th Street and Northeast 154th Street. That will provide the ability to walk or bike from the park and ride to the fairgrounds. So I'm really excited. It's a plug-in for the Northeast 10th Avenue once it's completed. Future transit planning with development review will continue to improve bus stops with ADA standards, integrate transit planning with capital project planning. The Highway 99 bus rapid transit planning is in the beginning stages. I have to ask the question, who on the committee has ridden the new BRT? I see a show of hands. One. Yeah, congratulations, David. Thank you. It's on my list. Taylor, I apologize since you're here hearing all of this. And a discussion on active transportation and transit isn't thorough enough without mentioning our complete streets. So that the term complete streets describes a transportation system that supports multiple uses, is more conducive to public life and efficient movement of people along streets designed primarily to move automobiles and trucks, designed to allow active and ample space for pedestrians, bicycles, and transit, and safer, convenient travels along streets for all roadway users. So the comprehensive plan has 2 complete streets policies, and we have a development development code for complete streets and a complete streets guidelines. The Clark County Council recently adopted this about a year and a half ago. So the purpose of the Complete Streets program is to encourage local governments to provide street and road designs that incorporate safe access to all users, including bicyclists, pedestrians, motorists, and public transportation users, with the goals of promoting healthy communities, improving safety by designing major arterials to include features like wide sidewalks, dedicated bike facilities, medians, and pedestrian streetscape features that protect the environment, preserve the community character. Okay, now we're back to the questions. So we'll start with number 1. Should neighborhood parks provide parking?
So we posed this question for you. We do have complaints sometimes regarding parking when it's not provided at neighborhood parks, people parking on the street, blocking driveways, so on and so forth. But so we recognize that there's an issue there. We also recognize that this is more complicated than just a yes or no answer. That there's costs that are associated with it. But we'd like to hear your thoughts and feedback regarding neighborhood parks and whether pedestrian access way is good enough or if parking is necessary as well. And looks like, Michael, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would lean towards no, it shouldn't be provided for neighborhood parks. Given the intended folks they're serving, it's not meant to serve people from outside the small surrounding half-mile area. They're not built big enough to serve that many people. And as soon as you start adding parking, then you're just taking away amenities that the community could use on an already small site. So I think with their intended use and intended service area, parking shouldn't be provided.
Thank you. David?
I will politely disagree. As a person does not own a car, I will advocate for people that own a car. I believe there are some people, depending on where it is and how it's designed, like you said, it's very complicated. It depends on the individual park in the neighborhood. But they may have a disability and need to use a van to get close enough. They may not have a wheelchair, something like that. So even if you have a nice paved road, they may be too tired, worn out to arrive there. So I would say keep into consideration the area, maybe a survey of the people that live there to find out if they're satisfied right now how it is, or if they're complaining that they live there and they need to have parking in order to access their park.
Excellent. Thank you. And Franklin?
I just have a question. If there was a move to provide parking, where would this land come from? I mean, are you going to cut down on the actual space of the park? Because most of these, I think, isn't there some surrounding allocation of land?
Yeah, that's definitely the consideration. Either one thing has to give, right? The park gets smaller or the area to accommodate it gets bigger to accommodate the parking. So
you'd make more roads to get to the small park.
Right. So it does get complex very soon. Michael?
To David's point, for people that need to use a vehicle to access, if street parking is available, there could be design consideration to utilize street parking specifically for ADA in front of the park. And that could accommodate that specific need while still keeping the park space. And I think the concern you mentioned before about people, parking in front of other people's driveways and stuff, that becomes an enforcement issue. And unfortunately, it's part of design. We can't control everything. And so we just kind of have to do the best that we can. But I think utilizing street parking is the best option for a park the size of a neighborhood park. And you could design things such as, dedicated drop-off areas that had larger ramp areas or things like that to accommodate as many people as possible.
Yeah, very good point.
Wow, it does get complicated because if you provide parking, and how are we getting there? Is it a sidewalk? Is it a bike lane? And then where's the car going to park? In the bike lane? It's definitely a challenging topic. We can't just say yes or no. So it's good feedback. So thank you. So we'll move on to number 2. In addition to pedestrians and bicycles, should Clark County expand transportation plan efforts to include new active transportation technologies like e-bikes, e-skateboards, and e-scooters? We call this kind of a micro mobility.
David, go ahead.
Okay. I lived in Washington, D.C. about 6 months of the year while I was going to university prior to COVID from 2012 to 2016. They had at that time these red bicycles that you could rent that would be on my campus and around in different wards in District of Columbia. A lot of the deaf people liked it. They weren't locked. And I always thought about, how does this exactly work? It was a little bit expensive. I was having an internship for asylum seekers that transportation, the bus system there is so expensive. Ours here is wonderful compared. So I said, well, maybe this would be a better way that we could get them to use the bikes. But there were some issues with it. Since then, they no longer have the e-bikes there. They might have regular bikes, but not the e-bikes that they had. And they had scooters there after I left, and they no longer have them. What happened was there was a problem with the brakes. There was a problem with accidents, and there was a problem with both the I think it was more than just Lyft, but another company too that had the scooters and the e-bikes where they literally caught on fire. The motors caught on fire, and so technology. So some of the things that they had to do in different places, DC, New York, and San Francisco, is just suspend having it for a while. Other places, they started passing laws like you had to have these locked up. So there would also be a fine. So I guess police would have to go and fine people if they're going too fast and threatening people down. Or if they were using alcohol or drugs, they would get another fine. They had to limit the speed of the e-bike so it couldn't go more than 20 miles per hour so it wouldn't hit people because people had an addiction to speed. And they also had to ban them 300 feet from schools or where elderly people had their own community center. And then they had to pass a law where more people could legally have lawsuits for being in accidents because DC didn't have that. Then the other thing I noticed was that there was an article I read about trails, and this is more about us than DC. They have trails, but not like here. We have a lot of trails. And so our bicyclists, sometimes the hikers and the bicyclists enjoy going down trails. The problem is with that addiction to speed, sometimes people would have e-bikes in different areas, not here, obviously, and they would go past people that had normal speed bikes, and this became a safety issue. And also they could hurt themselves because they didn't realize on those e-bikes how they couldn't brake in time because you have to plan like a car in advance. It's different. So those are my concerns about us doing that here.
summarize it, am I hearing that you're not in favor of implementing new policies regarding this?
I am concerned that this is like the cool thing. It's like the new thing that we're encouraging people to get out of their cars that don't necessarily realize there's going to be a lot more accidents, a lot more lawsuits. There's going to be have to pass other laws. We're going to have police having to give out more fines and tickets. It's a complicated thing, just like the last thing we talked about. It's not a simple thing. If we want to do this, we have to be logical that we're going to have the same problems that DC, New York, and San Francisco are having.
Can I make a statement? This is Walt.
Yeah, go ahead. Well,
yes, I agree a lot with what David said, but the problem is that whether or not we choose to provide policies or not, there's a couple of things. People are going to use whatever technology, whatever mechanisms that they have, an e-bike or scooter or anything like that, regardless. And considering we're talking about unincorporated areas and the lack of patrol presence that the police has for something like that, and also the willingness of the police to address the issue when it's such a low priority, I think that we're kind of fooling ourselves in thinking that a policy would have any impact at all. It's going to happen. It does happen. I mean, I have a friend at a local neighborhood park that hates all the skateboarders, and these aren't motorized, that are wheeling around on the property of the neighborhood park, and he's upset about it. But I don't see a 911 phone call or anything or any policy that the county could come up with that would deter a 15-year-old, 14-year-old, 12-year-old child or teenager from, riding their e-bike or their skateboard or their Segway, whatever it may be. I do know that accessing the neighborhood parks are very important for certain areas where there are facilities that serve people with cognitive disabilities. And I come back to my previous occupation of access by means of ADA complementary service, which isn't a lot of the unincorporated area because of the restrictions. But I would just suggest that we keep those points in mind.
point well taken. Thank you. Franklin, you have your hand up?
Yes, I guess I'm kind of piggybacking on the last couple of comments, but I just want to share a couple of other things. They had these e-scooters, I guess, over in Portland. And this was a couple of years ago because I haven't been frequenting Portland lately. But even young adults, not just teenagers, but even young adults would be speeding down the sidewalks. And there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, in downtown Portland. And I'm speaking a couple of years ago. And there was really some serious safety issues. You have to really, as a pedestrian, you have to really kind of walk with your awareness for these scooters so that, you don't get ambushed by that. And I don't know that policy is going to be the answer. You may have to do some kind of a campaign like, going to visit schools to encourage proper skateboarding etiquette or something like that. Because even now in Vancouver, my wife and I walk through the neighborhood for exercise, and especially in the summer months, there's a lot of kids either on skateboards or bicycles, and instead of using the bicycle lane, the bicycles are up on the sidewalk. So I think that the only real potential solution around providing that kind of access is to do a really kind of a marketing campaign in the schools where the kids who are potentially the most high users of skateboards and possibly the biggest community of violators would have some sense of this is the protocol, you know, just like we all drive on the right-hand side of the street. That's all.
Great, thank you. Michael, you're up next.
So I think, you know, given all the things, all the concerns that everyone's voiced so far, yes, it needs to be considered. Definitely. Does it need to have specific policies? Maybe not. I think the education that Franklin was just speaking about is probably going to be the best solution to most of the problems. From personal experience, I've got 2 stepsons that are teenagers now. And when they started going to middle school a few years back, they really wanted to ride their bikes to school. And we lived up in Salmon Creek, north of 139th, and they went to Alki. And they could get there riding mostly through neighborhoods on the streets, and that was fine. But once they got to 139th, they had to ride on 139th. Well, their mom was completely against them riding in the bike lane. If they wanted to do it, they had to ride on the sidewalk. She was so terrified that they were going to get hit by the car. And so I think that's where the education component could be very important, because if we could teach safe use of the sidewalks with bicycles or skateboards to kids, we could encourage the active transportation, and as they became more comfortable, as they became better users, they could shift to the bike lane.
Yeah, great point. It gets back to our earlier discussion last month regarding the types of users and educating them to be more confident. Is it time to switch interpreters?
That would be great. Thank you.
You know, so I do want to point out that, you know, when it comes to the e-bikes, the e-scooters, so I have talked with the city of Vancouver. They were interested in, because they've been approached a few times by various bike outfits that wanted to potentially supply e-bikes for rent like they did in Portland, but we're just not at a critical mass yet. So we're not there, and it would really only work like down in the waterfront area if it ever does happen. So we're talking unincorporated Clark County. So it wouldn't necessarily make sense, but it does make sense though to go back and look at our policies to see if the education policies that we have in place for transportation include the e-bikes, e-skateboards, and e-scooters. So I think that would be the best bang for our buck too. So we'll go back and look at that. Thank you. Because I see hands up still. Michael, did you have more comments?
I just kind of wanted to add what you were saying there. So when we were looking at the bus route thing in the quarter mile, and you know, you get a cul-de-sac in, and someone that is 100 feet away from the bus stop has to walk half a mile to get to the bus stop. And essentially, that wasn't necessarily poor planning, but there wasn't a lot of ahead thought given to that particular thing. And so while the e-bikes and e-skateboards, it may be a long way out from unincorporated Clark County, if we don't start thinking about it ahead of time, we could end up in the same situation potentially in the future, saying, well, I wish we had thought about that.
Yeah.
Franklin, did you have a question? Your hand is still up.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm not sure how to get my hand down. I'm sorry.
Oh, I can. Okay. Sorry.
Linda, did you have a question?
I just want to make a comment. I don't think we can avoid. I think there's going to be a growing prevalence of people with e-bikes. There's a lot of people in our neighborhood have begun to own them. And I do get really concerned. There's a number of teenagers who are completely reckless when they are using e-bikes. So there's like 2 markets. There's the entities who provide rental e-bikes or e-scooters, but there's also a growing number of people who actually own them to use. But they're, as I say, a lot of the teenagers in our neighborhood, I don't see them using them to get to access school or anything. They just sort of ride around at the highest speeds they possibly can on our neighborhood sidewalks. So I do have a lot of concerns about conflicts between pedestrians and people, I think, in growing numbers who will be using e-bikes. And my comment also, I mean, I'm concerned about the conflict between pedestrian and e-bike users on sidewalks. Then there's also the problem and the safety issue of if you have people who use e-bikes and e-scooters in travel lanes, because then there's the conflict between the motor vehicle and these e-bikes and e-scooters. So I don't think the county can ignore it, but I'm not sure what you can do to actually set policies or whatever else, or what planning efforts that can be made, because I think we're going to be faced with growing numbers of e-bikes and e-scooters in our communities.
I will say from our planning perspective, it has the emergence of e-bikes has changed our long-range planning. In unincorporated Clark County, we have a significant amount of streets that have steep grades, and those grades used to be inaccessible for bikes. With the emergence of e-bikes, those terrains can easily be ridden. So when we choose whether to classify a street with or without bike lanes, the emergence of e-bikes really changes the equation.
Yes, it does. I agree. Thank you, Matt. All right. So the last question, number 3, more of the same what we were just talking about. So I apologize. Should emerging micromobility modes have specific goals and policies along with bicycles and pedestrians?
Go ahead, Michael. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I don't think they need specific goals for themselves. I think they can fall under the existing categories. I think they just need to be given that consideration of their higher speeds and those sorts of things. But as far as specific goals, they're essentially using the same systems as, a non-electric bike would use. It's just, making sure we consider their speed or those sorts of things as opposed to creating specific goals for them.
So are you suggesting to make sure that the transportation policies that we currently have include the micromobility?
Yeah, I definitely think it should be included. As as we've heard, there's a lot of increased use and we're not going to get away from it. So I definitely think it should be included, but I don't know that we need to break it out as its own specific thing.
Okay, thank you.
David?
I think we should have that. Emerging micromobility modes have specific goals, but I would also add, if you are, let's say, Klein Line, and there's places you could ride like in the parking lot on your electric vehicle, whatever. But when you get to the trails, there should probably be a sign up that says, you're getting to an area where there's trails, don't use electric scooters here, don't use electric bikes here, it's not safe. So I do think we need to have some policies out there. And again, like you said, education is a great idea, but you're always going to miss people with some education. So just have a sign and say, this area here, there's not going to be electronic devices because it's not safe.
Good point. And I think that's what we learned from the discussion regarding the last question was policies alone don't make this issue go away. It's education and enforcement. I think that's what the sounding board kind of underlined in this conversation.
Does anyone else have anything to contribute for this? Okay. Here's my my obligatory slide, that shows how to report a road concern. Just in case, as a reminder, so please report your road concerns and the issues on the link provided. And if you have any speeding concerns, there's contact information for the sheriff's office. And that's it. That's meeting number 5.
I know we're ending early. We're trying not to be low on content. So I apologize if you want to stay here for 2 hours, but it is what it is, I guess.
Does anyone have anything?
Thank you for your brevity.
Well, you're welcome. All right, so I guess that's it, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye.
I should have some notes for you guys tomorrow.